What I've really loved, and probably the most special moments I've created in events, have been moments of connection and events that really feel like they're part of they're intrinsically part of the DNA of that place, and creating those really rich experiences that, like I said before, I suppose that you walk away feeling like you've had this moment.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Over the last year, we've detailed the impact of the pandemic on the food industry. Hospitality is all about connection, whether over a coffee, a four-course meal, or at an event celebrating an array of producers. With restrictions on events and large gatherings over the last year, what form will food events take as society starts to open up again? Kristy Austin is the Managing Director of We Are Neighbourgood. Kristy, how are you going?
Hey, Anthony. Well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's good to talk to you. You've had a pretty interesting year. We've talked to many operators and chefs and restaurateurs and sommeliers about the impact on the restaurant industry. You're in the events game. What sort of impact and changes have you had over the last year because of what's happened?
Yeah, it's been a really challenging one. I think, like most people, I kind of started last year with 6 to 8 months worth of work that was locked in from kind of January. I was working on a weirdly kind of an event that I don't normally do, a sports event, which is not my field of work, but I was working on that, and funnily enough, it was actually for Bloomberg out of the States, and it was a running event, and it was it's very strange. We kind of went into that not obviously knowing what was going to happen, and then we kind of got wind actually almost before it really happened here because of, I guess, having a bit more of a connection into Bloomberg and into the States of just what was starting to unravel, I suppose, overseas. And there was real hesitation from them around continuing with the event, which we were, I guess, with only the knowledge that we had, were kind of thinking it was a bit crazy, and, they were wanting people in full suits with gloves and sanitizer and all of this to be at the events, and then very quickly from there it was, oh no, there's something happening, and no, we're going to cancel. And that was kind of about 5 weeks before I even had kind of come here at all. And that's when it just started to really implode, I suppose, of just really starting to see, events slipping away, work slipping away, and pretty much my calendar got wiped in about 2 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was a kind of a strange time of just, it all happened so fast, I think. You didn't even really have time to digest it. And then I just remember talking to my partner about it and just saying, feeling incredibly uneasy, but also just, I suppose, being in the nature of the events in the industry, you just run at such a fast pace, and actually having downtime is quite unusual and a chance to breathe. And I think it was kind of that, coupled with the fact that there was no work on the table. It was a very challenging time, and I think it took me a while to actually just sit in it and be okay with it. And, thank God for JobKeeper, because I bloody wouldn't be here without it. But I think, it was having to just kind of take that on board and realise that I actually had no idea when it was going to come back in any form. When you kind of talk with colleagues and mates and things that are in the industry, and no one knew. So it was just, I guess, a time of reflection, a time to kind of take a step back and be okay with waking up and having absolutely nothing to do, which was very weird. And then I suppose kind of coming out of that after feeling a bit sad and sorry for myself, and being a bit selfish, I suppose, about it. Then kind of, I guess, stepping out of that and just going, okay, well, what are the things that maybe I can kind of do with my time now that I'm literally sitting here twiddling my thumbs? So, I suppose like most people, it started out a bit shit, but I guess it kind of there was some light that I found, in and around it that I guess has led me to where I am now. Which I guess is good.
How do you navigate the sort of landscape that we've been in the last year as an event organizer, where sort of large gatherings, weren't allowed, and then when they are, there are restrictions. What sort of changed in regards to events for you?
Yeah, I guess for me, maybe it's my kind of stubbornness, I suppose, and my why I love events and why I even got into the industry, I suppose, is that opportunity for connection with community and place and people, and providing something, I suppose, that maybe has never been experienced before, or creating moments that people cherish and take away with them, and creating some kind of impact. And I think with COVID, it obviously made it incredibly hard to do any of that. So I think, for a lot of people within the industry, they, pivoted and did things that were a bit more of an online piece, whether that was, I know, quite a few podcasts started that were for the events industry, which is kind of talking, I guess, sharing knowledge and talking about everybody's struggles. There was a few online events that I kind of participated in of, whether that was kind of getting a bunch of people on a panel to kind of, I guess, talk about key industry pieces, or it might be key topics, or getting those kind of people in a room in a bit more of an online format. But for me, I guess I really struggled with all of that because, it's not really my forte. It's not how why I've wanted to be in events, and the kind of all the reasons I just gave. So I found it really quite challenging to just kind of come into this world of going, okay, well, this is kind of now where we need to sit. And, I'm for so many of my peers that took that leap and had to change their business completely because they literally were going to go under, and took that leap to really turn upside down and go, okay, well, what can we kind of provide for people that is, still some kind of form of interaction while people are sitting at home and feeling a bit flat. And there was some incredible things, like you look at Melbourne Food and Wine Festival. I mean, they were 4 days out from launching their event and they literally had to turn it completely all online. So with that, obviously a lot of live events got cancelled, but Pat Nurse and the team there did an incredible job of, creating these kind of moments that I suppose the silver lining is that, some of those moments in that festival are some of the most brilliant moments I've kind of taken away, where they were able to, I suppose, harness a bit more of an international, not only awareness, but even from a talent chef pool perspective where, they had Mauro Collegreco on and he walked them through his incredible garden, and you got to see kind of firsthand where he lived and where he worked and how he worked. And they did the same with Rene Redzepi. And so there was kind of these really beautiful moments that you don't get at live events. That person comes out, they cook at the event, which is incredible. You might hear them speak, but to actually see them in their own environment and talking so passionately about what they do, even with the kind of, the shitty reception and everything, it all kind of added to it. So I guess, in some ways I steered away from, from what I do. I suppose I didn't really delve into that world, but in terms of interacting with how other people did it, I think there was still really beautiful moments that you could take and take away from that. And it didn't kind of, I guess, make you feel like you were getting a second best event experience.
You've been behind some of the biggest food festivals in Australia, like Taste Festivals and Margaret River Gourmet Escape, and also one that's on this weekend that we can talk about later. What does it take to create a great food event?
I think it's tricky, I mean, a lot of those kind of festivals are big kind of corporate conglomerates behind it. So I think it does really help because, you know, I suppose there is a certain level of access that you are able to get when you can't get when you're a, you know, small-time business. I think it takes, you know, especially in Australia, it's really interesting. Like I've done a bit of work overseas as well in the food space and launching into kind of new markets into Asia and things. And Australia is kind of quite unique in that we are actually really at the forefront and really driving, I believe, quite a lot that is happening within that space from food and drink events. We are also incredibly oversaturated, so it is really hard to find, I suppose, what is unique and what is going to kind of make you be easily identifiable with everything else that is going on. You know, we have more food and wine events per capita than anywhere else in the world.
Wow.
And yeah, it's kind of hard to believe, but and I think we do them so well. So, you know, something like Taste, for example, I mean, that's been around for a long time. You know, I think it's one of the longest running food festival of its scale and in its kind of format. Longest running food festivals ever, and that kind of came from, you know, out of London, and then very quickly grew into, you know, 26 events across the world in different places in Europe and Asia and Australia. And I think they were really at the tipping point where no one had really kind of turned a festival into something like they had, where it was this quite cool experience. It was getting very high-end chefs. It was incredibly approachable. It was taking that premium experience into something that was really tangible and really accessible. And, you know, I think even still, like, you know, Taste it still exists. It doesn't exist, unfortunately, in Australia anymore. And I think that's just a sign of kind of the times and that there is so much going on that you really need to be pushing the boundaries all the time. But to answer your question, I think it takes creativity, it takes ingenuity, and I think it really takes, it's very much built on relationships, I think, because chefs are, you know, some of the biggest celebrities now in the world, and it's kind of weird. You know, my partner's a full-time musician, and he's like, you know, chefs get paid more than musicians get paid these days. And I think, you know, from locally just here even, you know, chefs get asked to do so many things, and I think, it's cutting through the noise and really offering something that is not only authentic and genuine for the people that are coming, but also for the people that you want to be part of it. And yeah, I think there are, you know, only a handful of kind of festivals that have done that really well, but I think you really know if you've got a good product when you actually talk about it to your peers or the people, like I said, that you want to be part of it, chefs, somms, and if they kind of turn away, you know that, I suppose, you know, they hear pitches from everyone, so you know if it's a good one if you've got their ears pricked.
You grew up in a hospitality family. Can you take us back to the early days, you know, with your growing up with food around you all the time? But did that have an influence on the direction that you took later in life?
Yeah, it did, and I kind of don't think I thought it would, but so I grew up definitely in hospitality. It's in my blood. Food, wine, everything is really being brought in from a very young age. Probably not wine, but my parents. My dad was a practicing architect, and my mum was actually in the rag trade. She worked for Mary Valent, John Hems, you know, years ago, Hems, I should say. That they kind of, you know, were young and bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and they had bought a place up in the Blue Mountains, and so we're kind of kicking around in Sydney wondering what to do. My dad's business partner in architecture had always wanted to own a restaurant, which always sounds kind of hilarious, and you roll your eyes when people say that these days. But I think back then in 1975, people were like, yeah, sure, you know, why not? And they decided to open a Chinese restaurant, and my dad's business partner was from Chinese heritage, from descent, and he had always kind of, I suppose, thought that it's quite strange that, you know, when you go to Chinese restaurants, and this is back in the 70s, and I guess it still exists now, but back in the 70s, suburban Chinese restaurants, you know, they'd always have a sign on the window that would say Chinese and Australian food, and then, you know, air conditioned on the window. And he was like, you know, I mean, from his background of just, you know, Chinese food and what he was brought up with, it was nothing like you would get in the restaurants. And so I suppose that's where the idea kind of seeded, and my dad loved it and thought it was such a brilliant idea. So they, you know, being architects, did a pretty contemporary style Chinese restaurant in Randwick, which actually is still there. It's called Choi's. And so they opened that, and was extremely popular, and I think they were kind of overwhelmed with actually how successful it was in its early years. And then they proceeded to open Choi's, I think it was called Choi's 1000 BC, which was in Haymarket. Yeah, and that was, I suppose, off the back of the success of Choi's, but then they wanted to create something that I suppose looked at what a kitchen would have looked like in 1000 BC. So they kind of, yeah, it kind of sounds a bit more wacky than I think. It was a bit more contemporary than probably what I was imagining. But my dad paints a bit of a picture of, you know, I suppose just going back to, you know, what was kind of cooking like. It was, you know, in the centre of the room. It wasn't this kind of, you know, second kind of space. It was very much part of the family. And I suppose, you know, how a lot of people still cook, you know, and so it was bringing that theatre into the centre of the room. It was also about, you know, creating much more of a communal experience. So having, you know, bench seating. They're like one of the first restaurants to do kind of bench seating. So it was this really interactive, very rich kind of experience. So, you know, fast forward, my parents decided to, you know, move out of Sydney and get back up to the place that they bought in the Blue Mountains, and I suppose just couldn't stay away from restaurants. And so there was a beautiful little post office. I grew up in a place called Mount Irvine, which is this most incredible place in the Blue Mountains. It's very out in the rural area, but it's all volcanic soil, so it's this incredibly almost rainforest-esque place, and you'd go through this windy road for, you know, half an hour off the Bellsline Highway, and it is, you just kind of enter this world that I've never experienced anywhere else. It's so magical and unique. So yeah, there was this little post office, and it had been shut for a long time, and my parents decided to buy it and turn it into a restaurant. And yeah, and you know, there was a community of, I don't know, like 50 people or something out there, but it became this kind of destination place that people would, you know, come out to and drive out to, or buses used to turn up. And my mum is the most incredible person. I think she was totally self-taught at that time. She'd been inspired, I suppose, you know, her background of food was, you know, meat and 3 veg, and, you know, my dad was saying the other day, you know, cooking meals, because both her parents worked a lot. She'd just kind of cooked, you know, meals for herself, but then had this real turning point of meeting my dad and my dad's mum, who was, I guess, pretty out there in terms of her cooking for that time. You know, in the 60s, you know, my mum said it was the first time she'd ever eaten garlic. She had never had lamb's brains before. She'd had, you know, all of these incredible things that my nan was making, and that really opened my mum's mind up. And I suppose that was kind of the progression into opening the eatery up in Mount Wilson. Was just, she started cooking from the heart, and the food was, I mean, you know, I don't remember it, but I was about 2, I think, or 3 when they had that. So actually they'd had my sister and I in that time, and then had bought the restaurant. So I remember growing up in it. I remember kind of being there and being with my mum, and my mum was always making scones, like 50 million scones. Now she can make them with her eyes closed, and they're the best scones. But and making beautiful, these gorgeous slow cooked lamb pies and things. And she used to have this huge dessert table which had all of these gorgeous tarts with, beautiful glossy strawberries over the top. And I mean, she was amazing, and that place was just packed. I just remember my mum was just working crazy hours and getting there, waking up at 3 a.m. and making all the tarts fresh. And of course I found it really boring because I'd have to go to the restaurant and just hang out, and my sister and I there was this gorgeous tree out the front, so we used to play in that, and then we used to make prank calls on the local telephone box, to anyone who would pick up. And then I remember this one time we might have called 000. Oh God, I'm telling you the worst stories. But and they said that they were sending out a car because they knew where we were and the location that we were, and they were sending out a car, and I don't think we ever made a prank call again. But yeah, and so, my mum had that till we were kind of, I don't know, I was probably maybe 4 or 5 or something, and then they sold it, and those people kind of ran it into the ground, so they bought it back again, and then, built it back up again. And then from there, my mum opened a catering business and had a catering business there, and that was, amazing, and did weddings and events and things all over kind of the Blue Mountains, and did even stuff down south of Sydney, and so built that up into a pretty incredible business. And I suppose that's kind of when I really stepped in, at kind of 13 or 12 or something, and started helping my mum at different functions and stringing beans and doing all the things you do. And I think at that time I just didn't really think anything of it. I just thought, this is kind of what my mum's doing, and it wasn't like I had this light bulb moment, but it was very much just part of me growing up. And then, my mum, it's funny now, I talk to my partner about it, but I suppose my lunchboxes were so different to other people's insofar as, people had their Devon sandwiches. I had sliced lamb cutlet or something, and, with this beautiful chutney my mum made, and, all, I don't know, like roasted capsicums that had been barbecued and whatever. And, and I was like, would roll my eyes when I opened up my sandwich, and, I just thought, oh yeah, I thought it was normal, but I also just thought it was not that exciting, and other people would be salivating over, what are you eating? So I think for me, good food had always been around. My mum, was an incredible cook all through me growing up. So for me, it felt like it just the norm. And then I think it only kind of really started to play a bigger part in my life. I moved to Sydney and, had to find a job and was not really sure what I wanted to really do. I'd gone into costume and set design and was kind of doing bits and pieces for theatre and a few short films, and loved it, really loved it, but was kind of, obviously not paying the bills that well. So was thrown back into hospitality and worked at a bunch of restaurants across Sydney, and kind of all the way through, really, even into when I started to really find my feet in events. My first events job was working for a catering company and being an event manager there, and then that kind of just spurred on, and then just started kind of escalating more and more into the events world, which is kind of where I am now. But then I guess, came full circle, started working in kind of more food events, which is, what I've been doing, more specialised, I suppose, in the last 5 years. But yeah, it's definitely not something I think thought I would fall back into, but it's I'm so grateful of my upbringing and my background, and I would never have thought that it would have come back around this way, but I love it. I wouldn't have it any other way.
What impact do you think that environment that you grew up in has had on the way that you approach the food festivals that you do?
It's a great question. I've never thought about it, but I think I would hope, I suppose, of just, for me, kind of, I guess that being part of my life for such a long time and, like I said, being kind of almost the norm, I think I'd really hope that, you know, some of those experiences I've had around food, my mum cooking, being in the restaurant and things, there's such vivid and really cherished memories that I think there's something that food and being in that world, I suppose, there is so much that brings people together, all of those kind of cheesy things I suppose people do or say, but I really do think that, you know, I suppose some of that really has come through in what I do now. You know, my company is what I've really loved, and probably the most special moments I've created in events have been moments of connection and events that really feel like they're part of they're intrinsically part of the DNA of that place, and creating those really rich experiences that, like I said before, I suppose that you walk away feeling like you've had this moment, and you take something away from that more deeply than I just had a great time and, you know, had a few glasses of wine or something. And that would be, I suppose, about telling people stories, and that's whether that's literally telling somebody's story, but also, you know, through the food, you know, the producers, the kind of connection back to land, just making sure that there is those kind of layers of detail that maybe people don't even notice. But I think for me, it makes me kind of walk away and feel like I'm doing something with purpose, and that feel like I'm giving back in some way.
You found it challenging pivoting in the event space over the last year, but you're back in your element now, and you do have an event on this weekend. Tell us a bit about the event and what it's felt like pulling something like that together again after this period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think kind of, you know, starting the beginning of this year, still with not a huge amount of work prospects, again, having lots of time to think. I recently moved, and in recently I mean kind of 2.5 years ago, but it still feels like we're finding our happy place up here. But it's we live on the Central Coast now, out of Sydney, and that was kind of really out of the fact of feeling a bit burnt out in events and working really insane hours, and just feeling like there wasn't much breathing space, and wanting to be a bit closer to my parents who live up here, and really wanting to understand the place I was in a deeper way. And that was, I suppose, my time in COVID was really spent doing that, you know, meeting producers up here, meeting people in the community, and I guess that has really turned into where, not necessarily I always will play, but I really feel like there is such an opportunity to create things that are a bit more regionally based, because of, you know, everything happens in the city. But I also think there are just some incredible stories that are not being told or have very little spotlight, and moving up here really opened my eyes to that in this kind of small bubble of the Central Coast, of just going, wow, this place is amazing and the people are incredible, and I want to be able to tell that in some kind of way. And that will come out in, you know, future projects, but that's kind of how this event really came up, which is happening this weekend, called Natural Element, which was really me kind of twiddling my thumbs, getting sick of waiting for, you know, work to kind of come my way, wanting to do something about it. And I suppose that means, you know, some kind of financial risk. But I thought, you know, I've got to start doing something for my own sanity, and also start doing things that I really value and want to do. So I called Mike Benny up and had a chat to him, and just said, look, you know, I want to do something that's a bit more regionally based. Newcastle Food Month had just launched at the end of last year, and they were wanting kind of pieces as part of that program. And so I said to Mike, do you want to do this with me? And he was like, absolutely. I think he was really keen to do things, in a bit more, I guess, regionally, in commas, but regionally based in places like Newcastle. And then, I guess that will kind of lead into hopefully some other bits and pieces that will happen in the future. And I think, the biggest thing that I was kind of talking to him about was, that I suppose there is, nothing that like this that really happens in those places and spaces. There is such an important story to be told, and I suppose, in just creating something that is, especially for somewhere like the Hunter Valley, that I guess has a certain, potentially a certain stigma attached to it, and really wanting to kind of create an event, an environment that just brings it into a bit more of a contemporary space. And so that's kind of how it started, and where we've kind of landed is, I guess, probably more than I thought it would be, and I'm super proud of it, and so lucky to be working with Mike. We've connected with the Edwards, which is a great venue up in Newcastle, owned by Chris Stranu. He used to be the ex-bass player of Silverchair, who's just made these incredible spaces, not only just the Edwards, but I guess has become a bit of a hospo juggernaut up there of just, I guess creating very authentic places that have a very committed community behind them. So the three of us have put this event together. It's happening on the weekend, and first and foremost, it was about getting the right lineup of producers, and that was making sure Mike was really adamant about it being, I guess, a bit of a share of voice. Not being making sure that we had people across wine, beer, and spirits in the house. It's winemakers and distillers and brewers coming from kind of all over New South Wales into one place. By no means are we creating something that is unique as an offering as an event, but as I said, I think having something like this in a place like Newcastle, it just doesn't happen. And with the lineup, I think that we've got, it's Mike has done that curation, and I think he's done such a beautiful job of really getting some unsung heroes in there. And then, no good kind of drink event is good without food. So we've been working with the Edwards head chef there, Mike Portley, who's come from Bodega and Porteño and Black Star Pastry and an incredible lineup of places, and landed himself in Newcastle. We've been working with him, and he's curated the most epic lineup of chefs, including Joel Humphreys, who I know you just interviewed, and Shane Mansfield, who's from the Flotilla up there, which is one of Chris's other venues. Remy Tattersall, who again is a pretty amazing chef and has such an incredible story to tell about how she got into food, and is up at Equium Social, which is a pretty amazing place up in Newcastle. So they've all come together and collaborated on this amazing menu of food that is different on each of the days, and you can't get the dishes anywhere else. They've kind of created them specifically for this event. And they've also, I guess the thing that Mike and I really talked about was really celebrating local producers. So there's all these incredible producers that are attached to that they're showcasing in each of the dishes. And then I think, Mike has attached his baller bar, which he's done at a few other festivals and things, which I guess adds a bit more of an international layer to it. But he'll be serving up a whole bunch of things that you really can't get your hands on. So really incredible drops that you may not see again. So there's I can't actually wait to taste some of the things he's got on there. And then he'll be running a bunch of masterclasses as well, which is, I guess, talking about, you know, the contemporary world we live in and where wine has gone and, where it is going, and in more of that natural world. So there's a bunch of masterclasses to just, I guess, a bit of a cheat sheet into how to understand those types of wine and orange wines and pet nuts and all of that. And I feel so proud, I think, of just what it has, hopefully what it's going to start, and for not only myself and We Are Neighbourgood, but I think as a relationship piece with Newcastle as well, and those producers to kind of lead into bigger and better things, I think, in the future.
Has the last year changed the way that you approach creating events, and do you think the events industry will be altered because of these the events of the last year?
I think yes, they will forever be changed. I think in some ways good, and in some ways maybe not so good, but I think it's just the world that we live in now. I think that, you know, it's interesting. I worked at a event, one of the first ones I think to kind of happen out of COVID was a whiskey event down in the Rocks, and really great little event that that this incredible company put on, off the back of, again, you know, not really having much in the books, and it was amazing actually to go to that event, and I was really interested to see how people would act and what the kind of there's so much more that you have to do with signing people in, and at that time it was, you know, temperature checks and all of these kind of other bizzos, but and to get people into an event already, people are a bit on edge and they want to get in and they want to just experience it straight off the bat, and trying to kind of get them to do all these other steps. I guess I internally had my own kind of concerns around what kind of reaction we would be getting, and then also you couldn't stand at that point, so you had to sit down. And I was just so blown away by how I think it was the best audience I've ever experienced at an event. People were so patient and so kind and so understanding, and I really hope that stays. Because I think, you know, people take things for granted so much, and, you know, we've had that carpet kind of ripped out from underneath us, and I think people are much more grateful, and I hope that changes for the better, and that people really appreciate what it takes to do that and to create that, and but I think in terms of, I guess, has it kind of changed the way they do things? Yes, I suppose, in terms of whether you can do it or not, but creating richer experiences. I think we have such a short amount of time to tell people or immerse them into a world, and really wanting them to kind of to really appreciate that moment in that space, in that time. And I think it's also given me clarity around, I guess, who I want to work with, and what kind of events and what things I want to create. Now, I think probably as I've gone on in my career, like I've, you know, done so much of working in the arts and then kind of working a bit more in the culinary space, and I guess also selling my soul quite a lot, because you just have to in paying the bills. But I think now this time has given me clarity to just understand what direction I want to go in and the types of events I want to create and the importance of them, and that it's not just about putting on something fun and exciting for people, although that is a massive part of it, because, you know, you don't want to get too deep, but you know, people are there to relax and enjoy themselves. But I do think that for me, wanting to walk away and feeling like I've done something with purpose, and created something that I can feel, you know, hang my hat on and feel really proud of, and that it's almost a layer that happens before putting on the events now, where it's actually going into those places and spaces, understanding what their needs are, what makes them tick, what is their kind of cultural landscape, and then creating things that respond to that. And I think that has come out of, self-reflection is such a beautiful time, because I think you do have the moment to just really sit back and assess. But I think, that has really stemmed from, I think, one of the first events that I did that really was kind of a pivotal moment was I used to work on an incredible festival called Darwin Festival, which still exists now and is probably by far my favourite festival in Australia. It's an arts-based festival, and obviously in Darwin. It is the most phenomenal festival because I think it is a much truer representation of Australia in terms of cultural landscape, people and place. And I was, brought on to just kind of help out on the side, and had never been to Darwin, never been to Northern Territory, met the most amazing people, and kind of from that, they had an event they used to do, which was a dinner in the Botanic Gardens there. It was 100 people, nice dinner. It's always balmy and it doesn't rain, so it was very nice sitting out under these gorgeous palm trees. They had Jimmy Shue, who was he did the food, and I came up the next year and talked to the artistic director about, I guess, adapting and evolving that into something that maybe is just less about people paying $150 to sit down and have a nice meal out under the stars. Like, what are those kind of extra layers? And so I pretty much I came up early that year and spent kind of 6 weeks driving around, meeting all of these amazing producers and farmers and people. And it's quite a different experience to do that up there, because it's people are, it's country, and people have so much more time and space and so much more to say when you peel back the layers. So I had, these amazing moments of talking to, mango farmers sitting underneath the mango trees with a cup of tea and just chewing the fat for a bit, because, you can't get into anything too seriously straight off the bat. You've got to kind of build that relationship. And I guess what came out of that was far bigger than, I suppose, what I had originally thought was, just kind of connecting producers, getting, a couple of iconic chefs to come up and to kind of create this meal, and that would be attached with kind of some talks and inviting those producers to kind of see what had come out of the produce that they had provided. And what kind of came out of that was, I suppose, hearing much more about the front line of what was actually going on for those farmers up there, which is a totally different landscape to anywhere else. And I think, talking about the kind of big supermarket conglomerates and the impacts that they have. And so it became, really. And at that point as well, there was, some amazing markets at Rapid Creek markets and things where you can get the most amazing produce that you can't really get anywhere else because of the tropical environment. So you have a lot of Asian produce and tropical fruits. And so the plethora of things that you can get is quite incredible on a Saturday and Sunday morning. But I think the kind of education piece around why it's important to buy direct or buy from these farmers markets and things, and that buying from those kind of bigger supermarkets is so damaging, and that produce, from a Northern Territory perspective, all the farmers, that gets packed on a truck and it goes all the way around Australia, and then it comes back to Darwin, then they unload it and then they put it on the shelves. So
wow.
You're not actually seeing the fresh produce that, okay, yes, it's 50 kilometres or maybe it's even further because Darwin's a bloody long way, 100 kilometres away, but you are not actually seeing that in its true form. It's been sitting in a refrigerated truck for, it can be weeks and weeks and weeks before it gets back. And then you're also getting kind of the shitty end. Everybody else kind of gets the good stuff and they're kind of left with the stuff that lasts maybe, 3 or 4 days once it hits the shelves. So I think that was a real turning point for me of just going, hang on a second, there is a real disconnection, I suppose, and really wanting to bring that into the events and make sure that there is that connection. And, with that, we had Duncan from Africola. He came up for that one, and we turned it into a kind of pop-up restaurant. So no one knew where they were going. They ended in a car park, and we just kind of, had, you could grab a beer and have a beer in the car park. And then, we'd hired, or we'd worked with this amazing person who had this disused warehouse space who just gave us this space, and we turned it into a restaurant for 4 nights. And Duncan did the most amazing food and worked with buffalo and crocodile and all of these things that, you don't get to really have access to. And that was really, I guess, spurred on to kind of creating those kind of food moments.
Well, for those in Newcastle or looking to travel there this weekend, the 17th and 18th, it's on. Where can they get more information?
Yeah, absolutely. If you head to the Edwards website, so theedwards.com.au, or you can just Google Natural Element, or as most Aussies say, just at Natural Element.
I'm glad you said it. Thank you.
Yeah. You can Google that and it will come up. But yeah, Natural Element, it's at the Edwards, 17th, 18th. And yeah, we'd love to see anyone and everyone there that just wants to come on a bit of an adventure to really, experience something, I suppose, that is a bit different, and I guess just have a bloody good time.
Well, Kristy, good luck with the event. Thank you so much for sharing your story on Deep in the Weeds. Stay in touch, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks so much, Anthony. Thanks for having me.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of Australia's hospo community, suppliers and producers in search of hope during this pandemic. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.